For decades, if you walked through the halls of the world's most prestigious institutions, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Louvre in Paris, the British Museum in London, you would see one name etched into the marble over and over again: Sackler. It was a name synonymous with refinement. It meant science, art, and unimaginable generosity. To the public, the Sacklers were the American Medicis, philanthropists who turned their vast fortune into culture for the masses. They were the gold standard of high society, but beneath the gold, there was rot. That name, carved into stone galleries and university wings, was bought with blood money. It was paid for by the greatest man-made epidemic in modern history. While the family toasted at galas in Manhattan, entire towns in Appalachia were turning into graveyards. This isn't just a story about a drug. It is a story about the machinery of deception. It is a look into how a single dynasty used the psychology of marketing to hijack the human brain, turning pain into profit and patients into addicts. This is the story of the Sackler family. This is the empire of pain. To understand the monster, you have to look at its creator. The story doesn't begin with a pill. It begins with an idea. Arthur Sackler, the eldest of three brothers, was a psychiatrist by trade but a marketer by genius. Before Arthur, pharmaceutical companies were boring. They sold medicine to doctors based on dry statistics and chemical formulas. Arthur realized they were doing it wrong. You don't sell a drug by selling the molecule. You sell the lifestyle. You sell the relief. In the 1960s, Arthur Sackler took a minor sedative called Valium and turned it into the first $100 million drug. He didn't just market it to the sick, he marketed it to the anxious, the bored, the stressed. He saturated medical journals with advertisements, bribed doctors with fancy dinners, and created the modern pharmaceutical sales force. He wrote the playbook. But Arthur died in 1987, leaving his share of the company, Purdue Pharma, to his brothers and their children. Enter Richard Sackler, Arthur's nephew. Richard was ambitious. He wanted a legacy that eclipsed his uncle's. In the mid-1990s, Purdue Pharma was looking for a new blockbuster. They had a patent for a continuous release delivery system, a coating that allowed a pill to dissolve slowly over 12 hours. They needed something to put inside it. They chose OxyContin. OxyContin is a chemical cousin of heroin. It is twice as powerful as morphine. For decades, doctors were terrified of it. It was reserved for the dying, for stage 4 cancer patients in their final days. The medical consensus was absolute. Opioids are addictive. You do not give them for back pain. You do not give them for a toothache. Richard Sackler looked at that consensus and saw a market inefficiency. He believed that if they could rebrand the opioid, they could unlock a market worth billions. The pitch was simple, elegant, and almost entirely a lie. They claimed that because their new pill, OxyContin, released the drug slowly over 12 hours, it had no peaks and valleys, no rush, no euphoria, and therefore they claimed it was virtually non-addictive. They said the risk of addiction was less than 1%. They didn't have strong science to back this up, but they had something better. They had the FDA. In a move that still baffles investigators, the FDA allowed Purdue to print that claim directly on the label. That label became their shield. It became their weapon. With the label in hand, Purdue Pharma launched the most aggressive marketing campaign in pharmaceutical history. They didn't target the big cities first. They targeted the blue-collar heartland. Maine, West Virginia, Kentucky, places where people worked hard, manual jobs, places where people were in pain. They hired hundreds of sales representatives, young, attractive, hungry. They weren't just selling a pill. They were evangelists. Their training manuals were filled with psychological scripts designed to overcome a doctor's moral hesitation. If a doctor said, "I'm worried about addiction," the rep was trained to say, "The delivery system protects the patient." If the doctor said, "It seems too strong," the rep would say, "You are denying your patient their right to a pain-free life." They weaponized compassion. They coined a phrase, "Pain is the fifth vital sign." They argued that leaving a patient in pain was medical malpractice. They flew doctors to luxury resorts in Florida and Arizona for pain management conferences. They played golf. They drank fine wine. And they listened to paid speakers. Other doctors on Purdue's payroll preached the gospel of OxyContin. And it worked. It worked too well. Prescriptions skyrocketed. Doctors who had never written an opioid script in their lives were suddenly handing them out like candy. For sprained ankles, for migraines, for lower back pain. But the lie began to crumble almost immediately. The 12-hour coating didn't last 12 hours. For many patients, the drug wore off after 8. When the drug wears off, the body goes into withdrawal. The pain comes back, magnified by the brain's craving. Patients went back to their doctors, desperate, saying the pill wasn't working. Purdue's response was chilling. They didn't tell doctors to lower the dose or stop the drug. Richard Sackler sent out a directive: pseudo-addiction. They invented a medical term. They told doctors that if a patient was asking for more drugs, it wasn't because they were addicted, it was because they were still in pain. The cure for pseudo-addiction, they said, was more OxyContin, higher doses. The milligram strength of the pills climbed. 10 milligrams, 20, 40, 80. Eventually, they released a 160 milligram pill. A single tablet with enough narcotic power to kill a horse. In the communities targeted by Purdue, society began to dissolve. It started quietly, high school football stars losing interest in the game. tools missing from garages. Then, it got louder. Pharmacies were robbed at gunpoint, not for cash, but for the safe. Grandmothers were selling their prescriptions to pay for heating oil. Teenagers discovered that if you crushed the pill, you broke the time release mechanism. You could snort it, you could inject it, you could get the entire 12-hour payload in 3 seconds. It was pharmaceutical-grade heroin, available at the corner drugstore. The Sacklers knew. Internal emails show that as early as the late 90s, they were receiving reports of abuse. They were reading news clippings about arrests and overdoses. Richard Sackler's reaction wasn't horror, it was deflection. In a confidential email, he wrote that they had to hammer on the abusers. He blamed the addicts. He called them criminals. He said they were the problem, not the pill. While the death toll mounted, the money poured in. Purdue Pharma generated $35 billion in revenue. The Sackler family became richer than the Rockefellers. They bought mansions around the world. They bought their way into the highest echelons of society. They laundered their reputation through art and philanthropy. Every time you walked into a gallery named Sackler, you were looking at a monument built on the graves of the working class. But the facade couldn't hold forever. The lawsuits started as a trickle, then became a flood. States, cities, and counties realized they were bankrupting themselves trying to deal with the crisis. The ambulances, the autopsies, the foster care for children left behind by overdosed parents. They came for Purdue. And here is the final insult. Here is the dark genius of the corporate structure. As the legal heat turned up, the family didn't stand and fight. They looted their own company. Over the course of a decade, the Sacklers quietly transferred over $10 billion out of Purdue Pharma and into offshore accounts and personal trusts. They stripped the carcass clean. When the hammer finally dropped and Purdue Pharma filed for bankruptcy, the company was a shell. The family argued that they, as individuals, were distinct from the company. They offered a settlement. They would give up ownership of Purdue. They would pay a fine, a fraction of what they had extracted. And in exchange, they demanded absolute legal immunity. No future lawsuits, no criminal charges. They wanted to buy their freedom with the very money they made from the crime. Today, the Sackler name is being scrubbed from the walls. The Louvre took it down. The Met took it down. They are social pariahs in the circles they once ruled. But they are not in prison. Richard Sackler is not in a cell. He is in a multi-million-dollar home. The family remains one of the wealthiest in the world. They unleashed a plague that has killed over 500,000 Americans. They destroyed the concept of trust between doctor and patient. They turned the medical system into a vending machine for addiction. They proved that if you kill one person, you are a murderer. But if you kill 500,000 people in the pursuit of profit, you are simply a businessman. This was the empire of pain. And the terrifying truth is not that they failed. The terrifying truth is that by the logic of the machine, they succeeded.